Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the last R event of the year. My name is Laura, and I'm a research technician at the Systems Neuroscience Lab and a member of R, the science outreach initiative that has been creating events like this one since 2012. And today, we are going to talk about water, such a seemingly ordinary aspect of our daily life. Water to drink, water to clean our bodies and our houses, water to cook, to water the plants, and even the sidewalks. Our life depends on water. It allows us to move from one place to another. It allows us to relax. Water permeates our lives. But do we know what it is? Well, water is made by two different atoms, hydrogen and oxygen. Two atoms of hydrogen and one of oxygen. When the two combine, we have the water molecule. And this molecule is quite special. It is transparent, well, not the molecule, water per se. It's quite special. It's transparently, mostly odorless and tasteless. Besides that, it has the capacity to dissolve other substances like nutrients and minerals, and to transport it through a living organism. On land, water also has the capacity to transport nutrients to soil. Water is not an exclusive molecule to our planet. It exists in space, as its two main constituents, hydrogen and oxygen, are among the two most common in the universe. In there, it exists mainly in the ice or vapor form, like in here, in comets, in stars, as well as in planets and moons, like the case of Saturn and its ring. There are several theories on how water appeared on our planet, but all of them state the same thing, that the first water that appeared on Earth is virtually the same one that we have today. Let's take a moment to think about it. The water that we have now, and the water that the first beings that appear on this planet have, and the water that we'll have in the foreseeable future, is the same. And it covers 70% of the surface of our planet, and 97.5% of it is salty water. The remaining one, 2.5%, is fresh water, and of it, this tiny, tiny bit, it's available fresh water, that is, water that we can immediately access and consume. But if we have such a small amount of water, of fresh water, on our planet, how can it be replenished? Well, this happens due to a process, an infinite recycling process called the water cycle. In it, the water evaporates mainly from the ocean, it condensates into clouds in the atmosphere, and when the clouds are too heavy with water, it precipitates back to Earth in the form of rain, snow, or frost. When back on Earth, the same water runs off and replenishes rivers, lakes, and the ocean, or it can infiltrate in the ground, replenishing the groundwater reservoirs. And this process is extremely important because it's the nature's way of transforming salty water into fresh water, the water that all beings on land can consume. Water is a matrix of life. All beings need it, from the beings that are in the deep sea to the boiling pools, for single-cell organisms to mammals like us. All animals and other beings need water to survive and thrive. Besides being the most abundant molecule on the Earth's surface, it's also the most abundant molecule in our bodies. It accounts up to 70% of our total body weight. As we cannot get enough water through food, we have to drink it in order to have a fully functional body. The water needs in animals translates into thirst and in the need to find and consume water. This is so important that mammals have a dedicated circuit in their brain that mediate water ingestion. Besides that, in our mouths, we have water-sensing receptors that detect the presence of water and mediate the proper drinking behavior as well as water satiation. But how much water do we need? Well, the total amount of water intake accounts for the drinking water, as well as water-rich beverages like tea or milk, as well as the water that is present in any food. The recommended values for drinking water, however, vary between 1.5 to 2 liters per day. But it can vary due to several factors, including physical activity, that is, if a person is sedentary or pretty active, general health, as well as weather conditions, because living in Scotland is not the same as living in the United Arab Emirates. Even if drinking around 1 liter or 2 liters of water per day seems feasible to us, there are situations around the world in which this is not possible, which Catarina de Albuquerque will later introduce us to. In situations like this, a person can become dehydrated, which has serious consequences both in the short as in the long term. Keep in mind that our body is 70% water. The people that are at the higher risk of being dehydrated are elderly people, as well as children, but any of us can suffer from dehydration. The most serious consequence of dehydration is death. However, way before that happens, one can suffer the effects of dehydration. It can affect how we think, it can disrupt our memory, it can disrupt our attention, and even our reaction time. We know that no one should drive any kind of vehicle after drinking alcohol, so maybe now we should advise people to drink water before doing so. Water is the matrix of our planet, it's the matrix of our body, and it's also the matrix of our societies. Societies all around the globe have been flourishing around bodies of readily available fresh water. From the ancient Egypt, bathed by the Nile, to the Roman Empire, bathed by the Tiber River, to the city of Lisbon, bathed by the Tagus, the longest river in the Iberian Peninsula, that is born in the hills of Aragon, in Spain, and meets the sea in São João da Barra, Oeiras. This river has been serving as a mean of transportation between riverbanks of goods and people, as well between Portugal and the rest of the world. Besides that, the rich and fertile lands around the river have been serving as a source of food since ancient times. Nowadays, these same lands are being used for agriculture, intensive agriculture, both in Portugal as in Spain, which consumes around 80% of the water of the Tagus River. These intensive monoculture practices have real in local consequences, as Sam Meyler will later introduce us to in his documentary, This is a Story About Water. Besides that, the fact that both the Lisbon area and the Madrid area large numbers of people also has consequences in the terms of the natural resources, in this case, water. And all these factors together can be detrimental for this region of the country in the future, especially in times of drought. And taking this matter into account, both Iberian governments signed a bilateral agreement on minimum water flow for both the Tagus and the Guadiana rivers, in order to ensure the economical and environmental sustainability, as well as the well-being of the populations of both countries. Water comprises the majority of our planet and of our bodies. It gave us independence from hunting, it allowed us to explore the world and to create all that we see around us today. And the truth is that without it, we cannot thrive. And now, we will watch the documentary. This is a story about water. But first, I would like to introduce one of the directors, Samuel Meyler. Samuel is a professor in the Department of Performing Arts at the University of Évora. He completed his PhD here at the Champalimau Foundation, and is also one of the co-founders of R. Let's welcome Sam, please.
Great. Thank you very much for watching my film, and thank you for the invitation. I should start by saying this film was a collaboration and a co-creation between myself and another filmmaker, Kathleen Harris, who couldn't be here tonight. So I was sort of working on the talk, and I thought I would create a title and then work my way down. And so the title I came up with is this, and my plan is to try to unpack this in the next 10 minutes. I can say that before I moved to the Alentejo, I didn't really think about water. Water was something that kind of magically appeared in the taps, and the only time I really thought about water was when I was brushing my teeth and making sure that the tap was turned off. When I moved to the Alentejo, and this is a shot from the film, but it's also very close to where I live, I began to understand how water is actually very political, and how water management is both a catalyst for and a reflection of some of our inequalities in our society. And hopefully the film showed some of that. And another thing that I learned was that although this film was shot in the Alentejo, this is a story that could be told in Spain, in Morocco, in Greece, in southern Italy, in Turkey. If you change the names of the locations and the people, it's a story and the conditions repeat. And this is a report from Oxfam that just came out a few months ago. So it seems like there's two interlocking or overlapping issues. One is that we have a migrant population that isn't integrated in our society and therefore becomes vulnerable to exploitation. And on the other hand, we have a reducing water supply that we're literally exporting in the shape of avocados and berries to often water-rich northern countries. And hopefully tonight, one of the questions we can leave with is ask, how sustainable is this? So if I focus in on the Santa Clara Dam, this is the dam that you just saw in the movie. And this dam provides water to the agriculture along the Alentejo coastline. This is a map of the Alentejo coastline where circled is the Santa Clara Dam. And these arrows are pointing to where the red lines are, which are the canals that you saw in the movie that bring the water to the protected nature park, to the agriculture that's done there and in the surrounding area. And if we look at the amount of water in the Santa Clara Dam and look at that over time, so on the y-axis here, the vertical line, you see the amount of water in the Santa Clara Dam, and on the x-axis, or the horizontal line, you can see the years from 2011 to 2024. You can see that the water has been decreasing continuously in the last decade. If we now map this with yearly precipitation in Santa Clara, you can see that although it fluctuates, perhaps unsurprisingly, the amount of, they're closely aligned. That the amount of water in the dam is closely correlated to the amount of rainfall that it gets. Seeing that there's been this decrease in the amount of water in the Santa Clara Dam, you might think that there's been a corresponding decrease in the amount of greenhouses in the nature park. But if we now map the hectares of plastic greenhouses in the park, and this is data looking at Google satellite imagery by Juntos pelo Sudoeste, an NGO in the Alentejo. And if we map this, what we find is the opposite. So although the water in the dam is significantly lower, the amount of greenhouses keeps increasing. I'd like to show you one more graph, because I continue to like to ask this question: how sustainable is this, and how long can it last? And so in this graph, on the y-axis, we see precipitation, and on the x-axis, we see temperature, and this is in the Alentejo in the summer. And these points are from the years 1970 to 2000. And if we look at the IPCC, the Intergovernment Model on Climate Change, Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, and look at some of the models that they use to project what the relationship between temperature and precipitation is going to be in the future, so in 30, 40, 50 years. And if we take the model that is considered business as usual, or if we don't do anything, where does precipitation and temperature land in 30, 40, 50 years? Well, it lands over here. So you can see that the oval's been shifted to the right and down. Now, of course, and we can say that this change is climate change, and it is about 50% reduction in precipitation and about a 4.6 degree increase in temperature. Now, obviously, predicting the future is nuanced. There's a lot of models, and it also depends on our behavior as humans. But the take-home message that I wanted to show with this graph is that all the models for the Alentejo summer, they predict increasing temperatures, decreasing precipitations. What they don't agree on is the degree of change, so where we're going to land. And this, of course, depends on what we do. So hopefully through the film and also through this conversation or this talk, I can show you that the situation with water in the Alentejo is severe now, and the issue is only going to get more acute and significant as we move into the future. We need more urgent water governance, and I think we need it urgently, and we should really be asking the question, is this the model of agriculture that we want in a protected nature park? I'd like to make one more kind of interrelated comment, which is when I first started making the film, I thought desertification meant the creation of deserts. So I thought that the end result of desertification would look something like this, with or without the palm trees. But what's been interesting to find out is that actually desertification is about a wider process. It's about land degradation. And it happens primarily through unsustainable farming practices and through deforestation. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we end up with sandy deserts, but it does mean that we end up with land that's more vulnerable to erosion, less able to hold water, and less capable of sustaining life. And something that I thought was really interesting about desertification was that it's not just a lack of rainfall, but it results from a lack of infiltration. So desertification primarily results from a lack of infiltration, not simply a lack of rainfall. When the land can't absorb the water, that's when we get these flash floods and these droughts and these sort of repeating cycles. And the amount of infiltration that the land can hold, well, that depends on human activity. So for example, unsustainable farming practices, deforestation, reduces the amount of infiltration that the water can infiltrate into the land. But we can design our landscapes to make them more sponge-like, to hold more water. And we can do this through very simple principles, the principles of the 3 S's, to collaborate with rainfall by slowing it down, spreading it out, and sinking it down. To slow it, to spread it, and to sink it. And there's a lot of ways that we can do this. I don't have time to go into, to explain them all, but we can do this through terraces, swales, check dams, water retention landscapes, reforestation, rewilding, temporary ponds. These are all ways that slow, spread, and sink water. And so when I think of climate change, I often and hopefully I don't think I'm the only one, I get a little bit overwhelmed because I think of the deforestation of the Amazon, or even recently in Valencia, and it seems to be happening at a scale that I can't quite affect. But when we think of designing our landscapes so that they can absorb more water, which will allow us to mitigate for the changing climate and create a buffer, this feels more empowering to me. It's something that we can do locally, regionally, and nationally. And again, I would argue that we need more or better water governance. In this case, a lot of the sort of projects that I just described, like temporary ponds and so on, this is being implemented by a lot of individuals and organizations throughout the country. And if we released public funding, we could upscale that in a serious way. So I'd like to finish with a quote by Bill Mollison, who is a biologist and a regenerative agriculturist. And he said, "Though the problems of the world are increasingly complex, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple." We know how to manage land and water resources in a regenerative way. I mean, that's already a relief. We know how to do it. We just don't seem to be able to solve this on a social level. So because of a lack of political will across the spectrum, because of short-term competing issues, we're not able to coordinate. And as a biologist who then started playing with cameras, coordination was one of my most kind of fascinating behaviors that we've evolved as humans. In fact, complex human society is a testament to the fact that we can coordinate collectively, and we have done. It is a quality that we hold as humans. I'm hopeful that we can coordinate to solve this collective problem. Thank you for listening, and also thank you for watching me and Ermine and Kathleen's movie. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Sam. And now let me introduce Catarina de Albuquerque. Catarina de Albuquerque is a leading advocate for the right to water and sanitation. She's currently serving as the CEO of the Sanitation and Water for All. Catarina was the first UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to water and sanitation. She has over 25 years of experience in human rights and humanitarian law, as well as numerous awards for her work. She has worked for the government, for the United Nations, as well as for the European Union. Let's welcome Catarina.
Isto não é para mim, pois não? Não. Muito bem. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. Oh, I must go on this thing that you gave me. Okay. Good evening to everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I'm a lawyer, so it's super exciting for me to be with people that I don't normally talk with, that I don't normally listen to, that I don't normally engage with. And it's fascinating. I've been smiling during the whole evening because you look at the things that we work with every day, but you look at them from a different perspective. And then at the end, Sam, you were saying many of the things that I say on my day-to-day life. So it's interesting, we come from different perspectives, but at the end, the conclusions are similar, and we think of the same solutions, which means, I hope that we are right? Good. So the big question today is, what is the state of water? And I can tell you now that the state of water is alarming, and we saw it in Sam's documentary. Water scarcity is not just a statistic. It's the lived experience of communities here in Portugal, specifically in Alentejo, The region's drying reservoirs, the struggles of farmers, and the impact on livelihoods are all too familiar, not only here, but unfortunately around the world. This is not just an unfortunate circumstance, it's an increasingly frequent crisis that disrupts lives, forces people from their homes, and impacts entire economies. And while Portugal experiences this acutely in some areas, it mirrors a global emergency where water scarcity and inequalities expose the fault lines in our systems. In fact, perhaps today we see water as an inexhaustible resource, even more so than we did years ago. I remember as a child, spending my summer holidays in Alentejo at my grandparents'. And I remember during summer afternoons, there was always a period every day where the water supply was cut off from the city, from the city water provider, because there wasn't enough water. So we would rush to clean up after lunch because we knew the water would soon be cut off. And this wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a daily reminder that water was precious. And today we often take for granted that turning on the tap will always bring us water, a sense of abundance that recent drought news has begun to dismantle. And this shift in perception brings to light the urgency of acting before this abundance, we assume, becomes a reality of scarcity. And the challenges we face today, here, but also globally, demands a renewed understanding of water, not as a limitless resource, but as a vital, limited asset requiring protection and careful stewardship. Water and sanitation are human rights and not mere privileges. And they were recognized as such almost 15 years ago by the United Nations General Assembly. Yet, and with no UN member state voting against. Yet they remain aspirational for the many marginalized, isolated, or forgotten people around the globe. Think of those communities, women who walk for miles to fetch water, children denied safe sanitation, indigenous peoples fighting for basic access. In my role as the first United Nations Special Rapporteur, as you said, Laura, for the human rights to water and sanitation, I've seen firsthand injustices faced by marginalized communities around the world. I was especially shocked by what I saw in Sacramento, California, where the city decided to shut down or restrict the opening hours for public restrooms, forcing homeless people to improvise other types of solutions to be able to exercise their right to sanitation. Open defecation and open urination were criminalized in many parts of California. And in certain places, public urination was criminalized as a sexual offense, just so you know. So the criminal punishment for the offense of having nowhere to take care of the most basic of biological functions. In Japan, I remember meeting an old woman in Kyoto, near Kyoto, who lived in a community with no piped water nor sewage system. This woman, who back then was almost 90 years old, still had to leave her house to collect water from a well. She did not have piped water in her house. And why did this happen? It happened just because she belonged to a Korean minority and because the community she lived in was entrenched in a legal dispute over the ownership of the land where they were living. And all the surrounding communities had access to pipe water of excellent quality, as is normal in Japan. And they all benefited from functioning sewage services. But this small community was excluded. In Slovenia, marginalized Roma communities had to survive without safe water and sanitation. And I remember meeting a man, I still have the photos with a man. Well, I still have the photos with the Japanese woman also. I met we could have prepared some photos now that I think of it. Okay, for the next time. So I met a man almost in tears in his eyes who told me that his daughter once came back home from school saying, I don't want to go to school because the other kids are teasing me because I smell. And the father then told me, I know she smells, but we don't have water in our place. And when I asked him what he did, he said the only thing I could do was to hug her and cry with her. These experiences, unfortunately, I could tell you many more stories, reinforce that water and sanitation are not a charity or a luxury. They are human rights. Every government has an obligation to uphold these rights for all people under their jurisdiction, not only for the citizens of the country, for all people living under their jurisdiction. As climate threats, economic inequalities and other crises intensify, placing the protection of human rights at the center of government action is absolutely vital. The climate crisis is at its core a water crisis. The rising temperatures, the erratic rainfall, overwhelming floods, severe droughts are creating immense strain on water resources. We see it in Portugal's dry summers, in Europe's shrinking rivers, in the floods, like the one that you were referring to in Valencia recently. Climate-resilient water and sanitation systems are crucial in order for communities to withstand these climate-induced shocks and recover more rapidly. While the world must do more to bring emissions down and avoiding the 1.5-degree threshold for global temperatures, climate change is happening right now, as you showed, Sam, and communities need strong adaptation plans as a matter of priority. And we must create policies that anticipate the changing climate and build in strong measures for resilience. And this goes beyond infrastructure. It's about building systems, and we were discussing this over dinner, that it's not only about the hardware, it's also about the software. It's about building systems that can endure and that can recover even in the face of severe climate impacts. Attending to these issues is not only a matter of development, it's fundamental for security. According to the Global Peace Index, violence over water resources has surged by 150% in just the past year. As reservoirs dry up and access to water shrinks, water itself becomes a target and the reason for conflicts. If left unaddressed, these tensions could escalate and further destabilize vulnerable regions worldwide. Consider Gaza, where Israeli attacks have damaged and destroyed at least 6 water wells, 3 water pumping stations, a water reservoir, and a desalination plant serving more than 1.1 million people. Gaza's residents survive on as little as 3 liters of water per day. And Laura, you were referring to our need to drink 1 to 2 liters. True. But then if we add up the water that we need to cook, for our personal hygiene, for our vegetable garden, for sanitation, right? Because each time we discharge the toilet, I don't know how many, it depends on the toilet, how many liters of water we use and need. So what I was saying is that Gaza's residents survive on as little as 3 liters of water per day, due to the reasons that I mentioned and the damaged infrastructure, when the emergency standard is 15 liters, and the recommended amount, I would say, cannot be less than 100 liters of water per person per day. And the Gaza Strip already struggled with its water supply before the war, and this has only been aggravated. Bombs are destroying water and sanitation infrastructure, and Israel has been cutting off or limiting water supplies, including supplies of power by blocking the fuel that keeps power plants running. And similar trends can be observed in Ukraine, in the Sahel region in Africa, and many other places. Okay, so what can we do? Investing in water and sanitation has always been important. And as water scarcity increases, smart investing is critical for supporting communities, but also for creating conditions for peace and avoiding conflict. We know that investing in water and sanitation delivers well beyond the taps and the toilets that the communities gain access to. It's a powerful multiplier. Studies confirm that for each dollar invested, the returns are exponential in terms of benefits in public health, in productivity, in poverty reduction. But despite this, and let me mention another topic that is dear to me, and in gender equality. I remember visiting Kenya, the village where Barack Obama's father was born, and talking with girls who were telling me that for 1 week during the month, while they were menstruating, they could not go to school. They could not go to school simply because the toilets didn't work. They didn't have a place to change themselves, to clean themselves while they were menstruating. Then they told me, the same girls, that when school was over, they came back home, and while the boys were allowed to do their homework, they had to walk long distances to fetch water, and when they came back home after that task of fetching water, there was no light anymore to do the homework, and they could not afford electricity. They didn't have electricity in the village. So access to water empowers women, allows women to work, girls to go to school, etc. And I could speak much more about this, but I think the time is also limited. Okay, but despite this, the shortfall in investments remains alarming. To achieve universal access to water by 2030, we need at least 114 billion US dollars annually. Yet we are barely halfway there. We also must insist on investment in understanding overall water availability, particularly in the context of water scarcity, and determine an allocation of water uses in accordance with human rights standards. When I was watching your movie, Sam, I was immediately thinking, and I had those thoughts before when thinking about the situation you were referring to. According to human rights standards, the priority allocation of water, so we have a limited amount of water in the planet, as Laura was saying. When I speak with children, I say, we drink recycled dinosaurs' urine. That's what we drink. And so if the amount of water is limited, we need first to figure out how much water we have. And then we must say, okay, 10%, maybe a little bit less, is the water that we need to realize the human right to water, the human right to sanitation, right? We put that aside. And then we start distributing the remainder of the water according to other priorities. It can be agriculture, first subsistence agriculture, I would say, to realize the human right to food, then large-scale intensive agriculture, which is not aimed at realizing the human right to food, etc., etc., etc. It's very interesting, for example, in Brazil, the way they prioritize it, first for human beings, and then for animals, and then for agriculture. It's interesting. But I think as long as you keep with the human rights standards, I think it's fine. We also, no, I've already said that, sorry. This means that the comparatively small amount needed for drinking and basic household uses must be the top priority. Currently, between 80 and 90% of water withdrawals are used for irrigation, while only 10% of water is used for direct human consumption. We need more transparent data on water resources, more sustainable policies that balance these competing needs. And we need the courage to demand that our leaders prioritize water as a human right, not just as an economic resource. So yes, we must invest our financial resources, invest in quality data about water availability, but our investment must extend beyond this. We must invest ourselves. The lack of prioritization of water and sanitation in national budgets is not a problem of technology, capacity, of knowledge. It's what you were saying, Sam. It's a failure of political will. We see government budgets diverted to crisis management, to military expenditures, even as the price of inaction on water and sanitation grows. Leaders have the power to change this, and they have the power to make climate-resilient water and sanitation a top priority for sustainable development, for healthier populations, for peace. We must also not forget that securing large sums for water and sanitation isn't enough if funds are misallocated or miss the poorest communities. Real progress will come not just from additional finance, but from a commitment to spend existing resources wisely, focusing on equality and lasting impact. This is the work, now a commercial break, this is the work of the partnership that I had, and you mentioned it, Laura, Sanitation and Water for All does. We are hosted by the United Nations, bring together over 500 partners from multiple different constituencies, and we work together to support decision makers in prioritizing and investing in water and sanitation. Some leaders are showing us how this can be achieved. In the past year, we worked with several heads of state who signed presidential compacts, making water and sanitation a top governmental priority. These initiatives are not isolated victories. They are part of a global movement we initiated called the Heads of State Initiatives, engaging leaders to bring water and sanitation to the top of political agendas. Since we launched this initiative at the UN Water Conference last year, there have been 14 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America that are working with us on such initiatives, each tailored to address their unique water and sanitation challenges. And this is political will in action, and it's a powerful reminder that political leadership can mobilize real change. Achieving universal access to water and sanitation requires accountability at every level. In our partnership, we work with the concept of mutual accountability, and we provide a platform that brings a diverse set of stakeholders, government, civil society, also academic institutions, to set clear goals, measure progress. This approach ensures that water and sanitation remain a priority and that we move beyond rhetoric to tangible and measurable actions. And accountability is not only about governments, it's about all of us demanding transparency and demanding results. As I close, I ask each of us to recognize the urgency of this moment. Water is the foundation of human dignity, of peace, and of survival. And we are at a turning point. We can either let this crisis deepen or seize this moment to build a future that values resilience, justice, human rights, sustainability. And this is not a distant problem. It's here, it's now, affecting communities, disrupting lives, and threatening futures. Tonight, I call on each one of you to lead this room invested as advocates. Use your voices to engage, to educate, to demand accountability. I think that only by standing together with unyielding commitment can we ensure that safe, accessible, reliable water and sanitation becomes a universal reality for now and for the generations to come. This is our moment to redefine what we stand for, to create a legacy that respects and preserves water for all, everywhere and always. Thank you so much. Shall I say something? Okay, I was told to tell you that you are allowed to ask questions.
Hello, great presentation. Thank you for all the information about the water, and also, I will say, for the documentary, which was great to see on the local issues about water too. I just have a question related to maybe some of the considerations that they have done about water. For example, since it is a right that all humans have, it's usually also the type of let's say, substrate that is never like put into an economical system, since it's something that is, for example, water that is on a river doesn't have a price or a value, and there has been movements that have tried to put some sort of economic value onto all of these resources so that it could be traced on how to use them and maybe, let's say, be involved in a more systematic way of achieving it. And I don't know if you have, for example, any sort of information about this kind of alternatives, and if it's maybe some possible way, or what are the caveats of that kind of system?
Maybe we take some more questions. And if you want to ask the question in Portuguese or in Spanish, you can, if you feel more comfortable, it's okay. Then I will sum up your question and then I will answer in English. No? Okay.
So thank you for the presentation. Awesome movie as well. A lot of things to think about. And basically the issue with water is a governance issue. We have water, it's not well managed. So now we are coming into, and this is not a question, it's more like a request for comments. So we are going into a future where we start now with 8,000 million people. For now, we are going to have in January in the US a person that is an active climate denier, and in the country where in average an American uses around 600 liters of water. On the other hand, we have 1/3 of potable water in Russia. So how are we kind of supposed to manage this? It's a request for comment.
That was an easy one.
Sorry about that.
Catarina, as you mentioned about $140 billion, which need to be a target per year for water and sanitization, right? In the event, we see with the past, our experiences that we have Iraq-Iran war, right? We have a better-like situation in Afghanistan. So the armament lobby, mainly from US, right? They do this, the weaponization or sell the weapons to those who does the anti-government activities. And also they sanction a lot of funding for the armament through the government. So the armament lobby, which is doing this because they have to sell the weapons, they do these battles or these situations. So how the United Nations taking care of such situations where the money goes to those people? Because if you read any documentary or any National Geography, major money goes to the armament lobby for creating the weapons and then selling to anti-government people and the government also. So for the military purpose, which you already mentioned. So how that can be? I think European Union has taken over saying that we will not invest on the armament, right? But US is doing that. Probably it's a bigger political issue, but how United Nations can do much better on that part to reduce the cost of this armament.
Okay, I think I will try to answer this first. Okay, now I have a pen. You can ask questions because I can, I can take notes.
May I? Hi. Hello.
Hello.
I apologize. First of all, I would like to thank Sam because of this intimate view into the daily lives of these people, and it's just a different way to see things, and I think it was beautiful. Thank you very much. And now to Catarina, I would like to ask, do you feel like the lack of investment in the future of water is a consequence of short-term democratic ruling powers, let's put it like that? Since how can, how may I say this? Would you feel like a more clear education of the people or more transparent projects would help with this future projects that may be applied, and just if the focus is always so short-term democratic ruling projects, how can future ruling powers be also, you know, continue this view if they oppose? Thank you.
So Catarina, thank you for the genuine talk. I feel you. I feel the human in you. I approach nature, water, mountains, trees from a different perspective. Okay. For me, they are sacred. I'm Latin American, so it's a spiritual thing. So, and I know that you're a human rights activist. So my question is, what do you think it takes to build a system where the river, the mountain, the tree has rights as personhood? So we are not allowed to take those lives just because of money.
I feel you. I wanted to ask a question that actually is a follow-up. Since you introduced yourself as a lawyer, you're probably aware of the strong movement of the ecocide law. And I wanted to ask you what you think it takes to go the extra mile in your position, in any lawyer's position, to declare something, you described Gaza very visually, as an ecocide. When are we there to actually really say stop and turn things around?
Okay.
May I ask a question, actually, since I have the mic?
Oh, you have a question. That's what one calls in law abuse of power. Yeah. I'm joking.
Okay, so just a quick question. Is there like a country or a region that you could give us as a good example in terms of water management?
At least a positive question.
And so we can have some hope on the measures they implemented and that it's possible actually to do so.
Okay.
Yeah, I meant, you know, water management in a context of water scarcity.
No, I think it can. Why can't it be a country rich in water? It can. I know many countries rich in water who are horrible and even worse than water-poor countries in water management, because for them, water is abundant. So they don't manage it, they don't attach a price to it, they don't control leakages, etc. Because, and you go, it happened to me in Costa Rica, I don't know if there is anyone from Costa Rica here, but I remember being in a restaurant with a water tap that was simply broken and the water was coming out and nobody was closing the tap because they didn't pay for the water, so it was just... So the question of abundance of water and richness of water doesn't mean that you are necessarily, as a country, doing it well. It can actually be the opposite. That I've seen, for example, in Namibia, which is a water-scarce country, where they take water scarcity very seriously. Well, of course, there are no perfect countries. There are no perfect countries, of course not. You can always pinpoint to problems. But I remember being impressed in Namibia with what they do and how much they respect water and the lack of water. They need to bring water for long distances. They manage it well. They have a strong water tariff system with subsidies for the poor people, precisely because water is scarce. Of course, I think Japan is, I gave you the example of the Korean lady, but outside those pockets, and there are other pockets, people living in homelessness, etc. The management of water in Japan is pretty amazing. They are facing a problem, which is the decreasing population. And when I told them, oh, you need to save water, what they were telling me, it was, no, we need to make sure that people consume more water for the systems to be able to work. You see what I'm saying? Because if they saved water, then there wouldn't be enough water in the systems to make them work. I've seen many good examples in many parts of the world. I criticize here the US. I've seen great stuff being done in the US, also very bad things done in the US. I think a problem that we have, and this links up with the question about the lack of investment in water, the question of short democratic cycles, etc. I think that we take water for granted, and I think this is problem number one. Problem number two is that when you talk about water and sanitation, like the sewage, etc., we are talking about investments that are buried under the ground, that you don't see. You see a school, you see a hospital, you don't see the pipes, right? So there are, and I remember being in Senegal and talking with somebody and asking them, why don't you invest also more in water and sanitation? And they were saying, no, a minister or a prime minister or a president, they want to invest in things that people see, that you can take a picture of, right? I think that water has the beauty of being able to bring different political parties around the table, right? So you were talking about the short democratic cycles. If you look at the US, for example, water is a cross-party a topic that gets cross-party support, Democrats and Republicans. So it's a bipartisan topic. So it's a good example of of making sure that independently of the different political cycles, water is seen as a priority that both sides have to protect. Of course, there will be nuances, and I agree, of course, that the next administration will probably deal with environmental issues in a different manner than the current administration. I am not familiar, to be honest, with some of the things that you mentioned. However, I remember when I was appointed Special Rapporteur, the first time I talked, I had many NGOs criticizing me when I said that water should have a price. And I was criticized because people were telling me, but water is a human right? How can you sell a human right? Right? Basically, that's what it means. How can you sell a human right? Well, food is a human right? And you go to a restaurant or to a supermarket and you pay for it. Or housing is a human right, and you pay the rent, or you purchase a house, etc., etc. There are other human rights. What the human rights framework means is that you should not be deprived of that right just because you don't have the money to pay for it, right? So it means that water should have a price, can have a tariff, but if you, for reasons beyond your control, cannot afford to pay the bill, the state must step in and support you to make sure that you can pay the bill and that you are not deprived of access to that human right. So human rights are agnostic in a certain sense to this question, and to the question of should you put a price or shouldn't you put a price. And the examples I've seen is that when you put a price, unfortunately, people take it more that people respect it more. The example I was giving from, what's the place? From Costa Rica. But there are many other places in the world where if you don't put a price, people don't cherish it that much. For me, the important thing is you cannot deprive anyone from access. Now, on the question of the armament, I don't know what the answer is. I think that the UN is composed of states. It's states that run the UN Security Council. 5 of them with permanent seats, 5 of them with a veto power, right? Among them, well, the nuclear powers. The UN General Assembly is composed of states. What I mean to say is that the decisions taken by the UN against states are taken by the states themselves. Any decision to limit the power of a state or the liberty of a state to spend here or there is set not by the UN Secretary General. The UN Secretary General has actually not much power. It's decided by the states. Now, how can we influence states to act differently? I would say you refer to education. I agree with you, education. I would also say civil society movements that put pressure on governments to do things differently. I think the example of your movie, Sam, there has been, I remember I signed that petition, the one that you showed at the beginning in the parliament, to stop the growth of greenhouses. There are no easy answers. It's a complex world, it's a complex political system. The UN is complicated, and I think that we need to focus on, well, I think soft power, and I truly believe in the power of civil society. 30 years ago, I wrote my thesis about the use of anti-personnel landmines, and when I wrote it, anti-personnel landmines were not forbidden. And when I was writing my thesis, it was nowhere to be seen that they would ever be forbidden. Until there was a global movement created, the head of the movement got the Nobel Peace Prize, and anti-personnel landmines were forbidden. So I truly believe in the power of people, in our power to change things and to put pressure. The nature. I'm not Latin American. I am from Europe. So I must confess that for a very long time, the concept you were describing was, I read about it, and it was hard for me to understand. You understand what I'm saying? It was very far. Until I visited an Indian tribe in the US, right? And then I understood it. Then I understood it. I understood it all. They took me to the river. They explained the context, their rituals, everything. And then finally I said, okay, it makes sense to me. I understand, but I think you need to be there to understand. You don't understand it in the books. My answer to your question is, I don't know. I don't know. I think there have been recent important steps taken. Recognizing water as a human right, I think, was an important step. I think recognizing the environment also as a right. I know that the perspective is different from yours. I understand it. But I think we are getting closer. Now, is it possible to recognize the rights of nature itself? I think it is. I think we are getting closer. Will it happen? That I don't know. I don't know. But again, I believe in the power of people, and I believe in the power of social movements, and I believe in the power of the good fight, fighting the good fight, and getting to some results. I think this is what I had to say. Thank you so much. Se calhar falei demais.
Thank you, Catarina, and thank you everyone for being here. We hope that you had a good time and that you learned something from this event. We asked you some questions during your registration, which we are currently working on, analyzing it, and we will share the results in the next R newsletter. We also have some drinks and snacks outside, as well as a curious whale created by our colleague, Giulio Triclio, that is eager to hear your thoughts on this talk. Please have a drink and continue the conversation outside. We hope to see you again next year for the next R event.